Hi, in this video we're going to look at putting together a drum and bass drum kit and going through some of the layers involved and how to get them sounding good. So I've got a quick example I've put together, then I'll go through the layers and some tips for each layer as we go along. So we'll start off by looking at the kick drum. I've got a little bit of saturation and limiting on the master out, which I'll just turn off for now, and we'll go back to that in a bit. So with the kick drum, generally I want it peaking above 100 Hz. With drum and bass, it's so fast, and because you've got a lot of low frequency information from the bass in there, you generally want the kick drum peaking quite high, and then to remove some of the low end out of the kick drum to make space for bass to sit underneath it. If you're looking for samples, or if you're building a kick drum in a synthesizer or what have you, if you've got something that sounds nice but it's peaking too low, you can just pitch it up a few semitones. Shortening down the tails of a kick drum can make a huge deal of difference as well. But for this kick drum, I've taken out quite a lot of low end, because all this frequency information here is definitely going to be a problem when you start adding bass. So I've got a low cut using a high pass filter and a low shelf, which is just reducing some of the bass in the kick drum. So that really tightens it up if I bypass the EQ. We can see the low end is coming all the way up to here, and then with. So that'll create a lot of space for bass to sit underneath it. Then the next thing is the snare drum, which I've got a little bit of reverb on, which I'll turn off for now. Okay, with snare drums, I don't want too much information below the peak. So here it's peaking at G. So if you've got any messy frequencies down here, generally I'd just say filter them off, because they're just going to create mess when you start adding bass later on. Another thing you can do with EQ as well, anything that's in mono you automatically perceive as being louder, and it's easier to work with. So this main peak here, this main weight of the snare drum, if you want to make that mono, if it's not already, what you can do is set Fabfilter Pro Q2 into mid-side mode, and then just do a low cut above the peak. Anything below this frequency now is going to be a mono, and if you want to exaggerate the stereo width in the high end, you can just do a boost up here in the side information, which will create more stereo width. To add more tail, I've used a multi-band convolution, but I've just got two bands. The low band is doing nothing, and then I've got a reverb above 1000 Hz. Again, just to get a bit of tail to the sound without cluttering up the main power and weight to the snare drum. And then next I've got a ghost snare, which this is from the Liquid Drum and Bass sample pack on Ghost Hack, and the kick drum is also. You can either use a rim shot, or you can take a snare drum and just really shorten it down, which is what's happened in this case. And this is just to add groove and shuffle between the main and kick and snare hits. So it's just a really short snare basically. Again, taking out any low end out of it. This sample was already EQ'd quite well, so I haven't had to do anything to it. So that with the kick and snare drum. And then above that, we've got some hi-hats. With hi-hats, it's quite simple, I find, really. It's just a case of getting good sounds together, try and avoid anything that's got too much transient in it, I find. If you've got something that's very transienty but you want to use it, you can either do a fade in or you can use a transient designer and just pull down some of the attack. You don't want too much low end information out of hi-hats either. If there's anything down here in a hi-hat, just get rid of it because it's just going to create mud in a mix. So then I've got another hi-hat that goes above that, which is got more top end to it. And then I've got a third hi-hat, which is to complement the ghost snare in this section, just to create some shuffle. And on the master, I've got some saturation, I've got some mech, and I've got it mixed back in with the dry signal. And a little bit of limiting just to get some perceived volume out of the track, basically. And then I've just taken some layers as examples, because this is quite, at the moment, quite dry sounding and quite clean and synthetic. But as soon as you layer over the top of that some breaks and some rides and things like that have got reverb and space within them, it kind of masks the drums. It makes them all sound together. Because it covers up the space in between the hits. So I'm just going to show you how you can tighten up some sounds and get them to work. So this is a kick drum I've made for a sample pack for Ghost Hack. It's quite a housey sounding kick drum. But it's got way too much low end in it at the moment. So with a kick drum, it will start off very high in pitch, and then it will drop down really quickly, and then it will slowly fade off. As you can see, the wave cycle here for this sine wave is much shorter than the ones here, so this is going to be like a third or a fourth of what the pitch is here. So most of the really low frequency information is right at the end of a kick drum. So just by shortening it down, we can really control the low end in the kick drum. So you can see it's made a huge deal of difference. There's a good like 10 dB at the very low end that's been taken off just by shortening the kick drum, and that'll create more space in a mix in a drum and bass track as well. And then next we can also do a little bit of a low cut just to control the low end even more. So I just set this to a low cut and go for 24 decibels per octave and go for somewhere around 46 hertz. Probably go a little bit higher. Let's try 51 hertz. And that's cleaned up a lot more low end. So if we go back to the original kick drum to compare, you can hear all the subby low end that's in this kick drum. By comparison, and for drum and bass, that's what you definitely want to avoid, because that will just muddy up the low end in your mix when you start adding bass. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at is snare tails. So let's say hypothetically this is the snare we were going to go with, which is nice and tight and punchy, but it hasn't got any tail to it. So as an alternative to adding reverb to it, I've got another snare drum here which has got more of a tail to it, but I wasn't happy with the character of it. So you can see by looking at the snare drum, where it started to turn into noise towards the end, that's the tail, which comes in roughly halfway through. So what we can do is we can do a fade in, and then with an EQ, I'm going to find where the snare peaks, and I'm going to do a really extreme cut to get rid of that. And then I'm going to do a low cut above that. So now we're just left with the clean tail of the snare drum. We can do more of a fade in to get it to sound a bit more natural.